The summer of 1997 had been the hottest Atlantic City had seen in 40 years, and the night Elise Morrow walked into the Montefiore casino, the air itself seemed to tremble with something more than heat. She was 24 years old, 5'6", with auburn hair that caught the light like autumn leaves and eyes the color of rain clouds before a storm. She worked double shifts at a seafood restaurant 3 blocks from the boardwalk, a place where the tablecloths were stained and the tips were worse, and she had been saving for 2 years to move somewhere, anywhere, that did not smell like brine and broken dreams. Her friends had dragged her here tonight. That was what she would tell herself later, in the dark hours when sleep would not come, and the memory of what she had done played behind her eyes like a film she could not stop. They had dragged her here, and she had let them, because she was tired of being the responsible one, tired of being the girl who always said no, tired of watching life happen to other people, while she stood on the sidelines counting pennies and pretending that someday would come. The Montefiore was not like the other casinos on the Strip. It was older, built in the 1920s by a man whose name had been scrubbed from the history books, but whose legacy remained in every gold leaf column, every crystal chandelier, every inch of burgundy carpet that swallowed footsteps like secrets. The place had changed hands 3 times in the decades since, and now it belonged to the Montefiore family, though everyone in Atlantic City knew that Montefiore was not the name they had been born with. It was the name they had chosen, the name they had earned, the name that made men look away and women cross themselves when they heard it spoken aloud. Elise did not know any of this. She knew only that the casino was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache, that the drinks were stronger than anything she could afford, and that her friends were already 3 cocktails deep and laughing too loudly at a table near the blackjack pit. There were 4 of them that night. Dina, who worked the morning shift at the restaurant and had a laugh like a seagull. Marcy, who was engaged to a plumber from Newark and never let anyone forget it. Beth, who had been Elise's best friend since high school and who had a talent for finding trouble the way some people find loose change. And Elise herself, the quiet one, the careful one, the one who always drove them home and held their hair back and pretended she did not mind being the designated mother of the group. They had been playing a game. It had started innocently enough, the way these things always do, with Dina daring Marcy to flirt with the bartender, and Marcy daring Beth to steal a chip from the roulette table, and Beth daring Dina to dance on her chair during a slow song. Elise had laughed along with them, nursing her single glass of white wine, watching the madness unfold with the comfortable distance of someone who knew she would never be called upon to participate. But then Beth had turned to her with that gleam in her eye, that dangerous spark that meant nothing good was coming, and she had said the words that would change everything. "I dare you," Beth had said, leaning across the table with her breath sweet from rum, "to kiss the scariest man in this casino." The others had erupted in laughter, the kind of laughter that draws stares and makes waiters nervous. But Elise had only smiled and shaken her head, and said something about being too old for games. Beth had not let it go. Beth never let anything go. She had called Elise a coward, a prude, a woman who would die without ever having lived, and the words had landed like blows because some part of Elise knew they were true. So she had stood up. She had smoothed down the black dress she had borrowed from Beth, the one that was too tight in the chest and too short in the hem, and she had asked the question that would seal her fate. "Who is the scariest man in this casino?" The laughter had stopped. Her friends had exchanged looks, the kind of looks that pass between people who know something terrible and are deciding whether to share it. Then Dina had pointed across the room, past the slot machines and the poker tables, past the velvet rope that separated the common gamblers from the high rollers, to a man sitting alone at a small table in the corner. "Him," Dina had whispered. "They call him the Fixer." Elise had looked. She had seen a man in his early 50s, maybe older, with silver hair slicked back from a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone who had forgotten to add warmth. He wore a black suit that fit him like a second skin, and his hands rested on the table in front of him, perfectly still, as if movement were a luxury he had long ago decided he did not need. There was a glass of amber liquid beside him, untouched, and a cigarette burning in an ashtray, though she had not seen him bring it to his lips. He was not the largest man in the room. He was not the loudest or the most obviously dangerous, But there was something about him. Something in the way the light seemed to avoid his eyes. Something in the way the people around him gave him a wide berth without seeming to realize they were doing it. That made Elise understand why her friends had chosen him. "What does he fix?" she had asked, and her voice had come out smaller than she intended. "Problems," Beth had answered. "People who cause problems for the Montefiores. They say he makes them disappear. Not just their bodies, everything, their names, their families, their memories. Like they never existed at all." Elise should have sat down. She should have laughed it off and ordered another drink and let the night continue without her. But Beth was watching her with that smug expression, the one that said she had known all along that Elise would back down, and something inside Elise snapped. She crossed the casino floor. She moved through the crowds of gamblers and tourists and working girls, past the spinning wheels and the clinking chips and the eternal mechanical music of the slot machines. She did not let herself think about what she was doing. She did not let herself feel the fear that was building in her chest like a wave about to break. She just walked, one foot in front of the other, until she was standing in front of the man they called the Fixer. Up close, he was worse. His eyes were pale grey, the colour of winter mornings before the sun comes up, and when they lifted to meet hers, Elise felt something cold move through her stomach. His face was a map of scars, thin white lines that crossed his cheeks and jaw and disappeared beneath his collar, and his hands, now that she could see them clearly, were missing the last two fingers on the left. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply looked at her, the way a wolf might look at a rabbit that had wandered too close to its den, and waited. "I am sorry to bother you," Elise heard herself say. "My friends dared me to come over here." The man said nothing. His expression did not change. The cigarette continued to burn in the ashtray, a thin ribbon of smoke rising toward the ceiling. "They dared me to kiss you," she continued, and she could feel the words tumbling out of her now, pushed by panic and pride and something else she could not name. "I know it is stupid. I know you probably think I am an idiot. But I told them I would do it, and I do not break my promises. So if you could just let me kiss you on the cheek, I will leave you alone and you will never have to see me again." For a long moment, nothing happened. The casino continued its eternal noise around them, but at their small table in the corner, there was only silence and smoke and the weight of his gaze. Then the man spoke, and his voice was like gravel being crushed under a slow wheel. "On the cheek," he repeated. "That is what you came here to do, to kiss a stranger on the cheek because your friends told you to." Elise nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. The man studied her for another long moment. Then he did something that surprised her more than anything else that had happened that night. He smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It did not reach his eyes or soften the hard lines of his face, but it was a smile nonetheless, and it transformed him from something inhuman into something almost recognizable. "Go ahead," he said. "Do what you came to do." Elise leaned forward. She placed her hands on the edge of the table to steady herself, and she pressed her lips to his cheek. His skin was warm and rough, and he smelled like whiskey and cigarette smoke, and something else, something dark and metallic that she would later realize was the smell of old blood. The kiss lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then she pulled back, her heart pounding, her face flushed, ready to flee back to her friends and pretend that none of this had ever happened. But before she could move, the man reached out and caught her wrist. His grip was not painful, but it was firm, and when she tried to pull away, she found that she could not. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elise," she whispered. "Elise Morrow." The man nodded, as if this information were being filed away somewhere deep inside him, in a place where forgotten names were kept. "I am Victor," he said. "Victor Crane. And you have made a mistake tonight, Elise Morrow. A very serious mistake." Before she could respond, before she could even begin to understand what he meant, a shadow fell across the table. Elise turned to find a younger man standing behind her, a man with dark hair and darker eyes, and a face that was almost handsome beneath its expression of barely contained fury. "Victor," the young man said, "Don Aurelio wishes to speak with you, and with your friend." Elise felt Victor's hand tighten around her wrist. She saw something pass across his face, something that might have been fear in a man who seemed incapable of feeling anything at all. Then he stood, pulling her gently but inexorably to her feet, and began to lead her across the casino floor toward a door she had not noticed before, a door that was guarded by two men in black suits who stepped aside without a word as Victor approached. "Wait," she said, "please. I do not understand what is happening. I just kissed you on the cheek. It was just a dare." Victor stopped walking. He turned to look at her, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something like pity in his cold grey eyes. "In this place," he said quietly, "nothing is just anything. Every action has consequences. Every touch leaves a mark. You kissed me, Elise Morrow, in front of everyone, in front of him, and now you belong to this world, whether you want to or not." He pushed open the door, and Elise found herself stepping into a room that seemed to exist outside of time. It was a private dining room, intimate and dimly lit, with walls covered in dark red velvet and a single long table set with crystal and silver. At the head of the table sat a man who could only be the Don. Aurelio Montefiore was not what Elise had expected. He was small, barely 5'7", with thinning white hair and a face that reminded her of her grandfather, all soft wrinkles and gentle curves. He wore a simple grey suit, no jewelry except for a gold wedding band, and his hands were folded peacefully on the table in front of him, like a priest waiting to hear confession. But his eyes were nothing like her grandfather's. They were black, truly black, the pupils and irises blending together into pools of absolute darkness. And when they turned to look at Elise, she felt her knees go weak. "So," Don Aurelio said, and his voice was soft and warm and utterly terrifying, "this is the girl who kissed my fixer." Elise opened her mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but no words came out. She stood frozen in the doorway, her wrist still caught in Victor's grip, her entire body trembling with a fear she had never known she was capable of feeling. Don Aurelio studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and unlike Victor's smile, this one was genuine, almost paternal. "Come," he said, gesturing to an empty chair at the table. "Sit, eat. Let us talk about what happens now." Victor released her wrist. Elise walked forward on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, and sat down in the chair that had been indicated. A plate of food appeared before her, lamb in some kind of red sauce, though she had not seen anyone serve it. A glass of wine materialized beside it, dark as blood. "You have caused quite a stir tonight," Don Aurelio continued, picking up his own glass and swirling the liquid inside. "My men are talking. My guests are talking. They are all wondering who this brave young woman is, this girl who walked up to Victor Crane and kissed him in front of everyone, as if he were just another man." "I did not know," Elise managed to say. "I did not know who he was. My friends dared me." Don Aurelio raised one white eyebrow. "Your friends dared you," he repeated. "And you always do what your friends dare you to do?" "No," she said, "never. I do not know why I did it tonight. I am sorry, I am so sorry, please. I just want to go home." "Home," Don Aurelio said, and he made the word sound like something foreign, something that no longer applied to her. "Yes, I imagine you do. But you see, there is a problem. Victor here is a very important man to me. He has been with my family for 30 years. He has done things that cannot be spoken of, sacrificed things that cannot be named. And in all that time, no one has touched him. No one has gotten close enough to touch him. Until you." He leaned forward, and his dark eyes seemed to grow darker still. "So I must ask myself, who is this girl? Is she brave or is she stupid? Is she innocent or is she something else? Is she a threat to my family or is she a gift?" "I am nobody," Elise said. "I am a waitress. I serve lobster rolls to tourists. I do not know anything about your family or your business. I just want to go home and forget this ever happened." Don Aurelio smiled again. He reached across the table and patted her hand, and his touch was surprisingly gentle, like being brushed by something soft and cold. "We will see," he said. "We will see what you are, Elise Morrow. Victor, take her home. Make sure she arrives safely, and then come back to me. We have much to discuss." Victor moved forward. He took Elise's arm, more gently this time, and helped her to her feet. As they walked toward the door, Don Aurelio's voice followed them. "Elise," he said, and she turned to find him watching her with those bottomless black eyes. "Do not speak of what you have seen tonight. Do not speak of this room, or of Victor, or of me. If you do, I will know. And the next conversation we have will be very different from this one." Elise nodded. She could not have spoken if she wanted to. Her tongue felt thick and useless in her mouth. Victor led her through the door, down a long corridor she had not seen before, and out into a back alley that smelled of garbage and rain. A black car was waiting for them, sleek and silent, and Victor opened the back door and gestured for her to get in. She did not argue. She climbed into the car and pressed herself against the far door, as far from him as she could get. Victor slid in beside her, and the car began to move. They drove in silence through the night streets of Atlantic City, past the neon lights and the stumbling tourists and the women in too short skirts calling out to passing cars. Elise watched it all pass by like a dream, like something happening to someone else. Finally, as they turned onto her street, she found her voice. "What is going to happen to me?" she asked. Victor did not look at her. His profile was sharp against the passing streetlights, all angles and shadows. "I do not know," he said. "The Don sees something in you. What it is, I cannot say. But he does not let things go, he does not forget. Whatever you are to him now, you will remain until he decides otherwise." The car stopped in front of her apartment building. It was a sad little place, 4 stories of crumbling brick and rusted fire escapes, but it had never looked so beautiful to Elise as it did in that moment. "Go inside," Victor said. "Lock your door. Try to sleep. And remember what the Don told you." Elise reached for the door handle. Then she stopped, turned back, and looked at the man who had started all of this. "Why did you let me kiss you?" she asked. "You could have stopped me. You could have said no." Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to look at her, and in his pale grey eyes she saw something she had not expected to see, something that looked almost like hunger. "Because no one has kissed me in 31 years, he said, "because I had forgotten what it felt like, and because when you walked toward me across that casino floor, for one moment, just one moment, I wanted to remember." He reached across her and pushed open the door. "Go," he said, "before I change my mind about letting you leave." Elise stumbled out of the car and ran for her building. She fumbled with her keys, dropped them twice, finally managed to get the door open and throw herself inside. She took the stairs 2 at a time, burst into her apartment, slammed the door behind her, and locked it with shaking hands. Then she collapsed against the wall and let herself cry. Outside, in the darkness, the black car sat motionless for a long time. Victor Crane stared up at the window where a light had come on, watching the shadow that moved behind the thin curtains. He had told her the truth. No one had kissed him in 31 years, not since the night his wife and daughter had been taken from him, not since the night Don Aurelio had found him bleeding in an alley and offered him a choice between death and service. He had chosen service. He had become the fixer, the man who made problems disappear, the ghost that haunted the edges of the Montefiore empire. He had hollowed himself out until there was nothing left inside him but duty and silence. But tonight, for one moment, a girl with auburn hair and storm-grey eyes had walked up to him and pressed her lips to his cheek, and something inside him had stirred, something that had been dead for 3 decades. He did not know what it meant. He did not know what Don Aurelio intended to do with her, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would not let anyone hurt her. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the night, leaving Elise Morrow alone in her apartment with her tears and her terror, and the feeling that her life, such as it had been, was over. She was right, but what was coming next would be worse than anything she could imagine, and better and darker, and more beautiful, because she had stepped into the world of the Montefiores, and there was no stepping out again. Not for her, not ever. Elise did not sleep that night. She sat on her narrow bed with her back against the wall and her knees pulled to her chest, watching the door as if at any moment it might burst open and swallow her whole. Every sound made her flinch: the creak of the old building settling, the distant wail of a siren, the footsteps of her upstairs neighbor, coming home drunk at 3 in the morning. Each noise was a threat, a reminder that she had stepped into something vast and dark and hungry. When dawn finally came, grey and reluctant through her dirty window, she forced herself to move. She showered in water that was never quite hot enough, dressed in her uniform of black pants and white shirt, and walked to work on legs that felt like they belonged to a stranger. The restaurant was quiet when she arrived. Just the morning prep cook chopping onions in the back, and the smell of coffee brewing in the ancient machine behind the counter. She tried to work. She tried to smile at the early customers, the fishermen coming in for eggs before their boats left, and the retirees who had nowhere else to be. But her hands shook when she poured coffee, and twice she brought the wrong order to the wrong table, and by noon her manager had pulled her aside and asked if she was feeling well. She told him she was fine. She told him she had not slept well. She did not tell him about the casino or the kiss or the man with pale grey eyes who had watched her window from the darkness. Her friends called her that afternoon. First Beth, then Dina, then Marcy, their voices bright with curiosity and excitement, wanting to know what had happened after she had walked away from their table, wanting to know where she had gone and who she had talked to, and whether the scary man had said anything interesting. Elise told them nothing. She said she had kissed him on the cheek and left, that it had been boring and anticlimactic, that she had gone home early because she had not felt well. They did not believe her. She could hear it in their voices, the skepticism beneath the laughter. But they did not push, and for that she was grateful. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. Elise began to wonder if she had imagined the whole thing, if the private dining room and the Don with his black eyes had been nothing more than a fever dream, brought on by too much wine and too little sleep. She went to work. She came home. She locked her door and watched television shows she did not remember and ate food she could not taste. On the 8th day, Victor Crane walked into her restaurant. She saw him the moment he entered, though she was at the far end of the dining room refilling salt shakers. He was wearing a different suit this time, dark blue instead of black, but everything else was the same. The silver hair, the scarred face, the way he moved through space as if the world had learned long ago to get out of his way. He sat down at a table in her section. Of course he did. He picked up the menu and studied it with what appeared to be genuine interest, as if he were just another customer deciding between the fish and chips and the clam chowder. Elise's manager appeared at her elbow. "Table 4, he said. "New customer. Looks like he might actually tip." She wanted to refuse. She wanted to throw down her apron and walk out the back door and never come back. But she knew, with a certainty that sat like ice in her stomach, that it would not matter. He had found her at work. He could find her anywhere. She walked to his table. She stood before him with her notepad clutched in her hands like a shield, and she waited for him to acknowledge her presence. He looked up from the menu. His pale eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something flicker in their depths. Recognition, interest, something else she could not name. "The lobster roll," he said, "and coffee. Black." Elise wrote down the order. Though her hand was trembling so badly, the words were almost illegible. "Is there anything else?" she asked, and her voice came out steadier than she had expected. Victor set down the menu. He folded his hands on the table in front of him, the same pose she had seen that night in the casino, and he looked at her with an expression that was almost thoughtful. "Sit down," he said. "I am working. Sit down, Elise." She sat. She did not know why. Perhaps because his voice carried an authority that did not leave room for argument. Perhaps because she was tired of being afraid. Perhaps because some part of her, some dark and reckless part she had not known existed before that night in the casino, wanted to know what came next. Victor studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope, thick and cream-colored, with her name written on the front in elegant script. "This is from Don Aurelio," he said. "He requests your presence at dinner tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock. A car will pick you up here when your shift ends." Elise stared at the envelope. She did not touch it. "What if I say no?" she asked. Victor's expression did not change. "You will not say no," he replied. "No one says no to Don Aurelio, not twice." He pushed the envelope across the table toward her. Inside you will find everything you need. Dress appropriately. Do not be late." He stood. He pulled a bill from his wallet and set it on the table, far more than his meal would cost, and he walked toward the door without looking back. Elise sat motionless for a long time after he was gone. The envelope sat before her like a small white bomb, waiting to explode. Finally, with hands that did not feel like her own, she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, with an address written on it in the same elegant script. Below the address was a line that made her blood run cold. "Wear the red dress," it said, "the one in the box that will arrive at your apartment this evening." That night a box appeared outside her door. It was white, tied with a black ribbon, and when she opened it she found a dress unlike anything she had ever owned. It was red, deep red, the color of wine or roses or blood, with a neckline that plunged and a hem that fell to the floor. There were shoes to match, and a small velvet case containing a necklace of rubies that looked like drops of frozen fire. Elise tried on the dress. She stood before her cracked bathroom mirror and looked at the woman who stared back at her, this stranger in crimson silk who seemed to belong to a different world entirely. The dress fit perfectly, of course it did. Whoever had sent it had known her measurements exactly, had known her body better than she knew it herself. She should have burned it. She should have stuffed it back in the box and left it on the curb for the garbage collectors. But she did not. She hung it in her closet beside her worn uniforms and her faded sundresses, and she lay awake all night wondering what she was becoming. The next evening, the car arrived exactly when Victor had said it would. It was a different car this time, a sleek black town car with tinted windows, but the driver who opened the door for her had the same look in his eyes that all the Montefiore men seemed to share. The look of someone who had seen things that could never be unseen and had made peace with the darkness. Elise climbed into the back seat. She was wearing the red dress. She was wearing the ruby necklace. She had done her hair and her makeup with more care than she had taken in years, and when she caught her reflection in the car window, she barely recognized herself. The drive took 40 minutes. They left Atlantic City behind and wound through dark country roads lined with ancient trees, until finally the car turned onto a private drive and passed through a gate that opened at their approach. At the end of the drive stood a mansion. It was not what Elise had expected. She had imagined something gaudy and new, all marble columns and golden fixtures, the kind of house that screamed money without taste. But this was something else entirely. This was old. This was beautiful. This was a house that had stood for 100 years and would stand for 100 more, with ivy climbing its stone walls and windows that glowed warm against the gathering dark. The car stopped at the front entrance. A man in a black suit opened her door and offered his hand to help her out. She took it, steadied herself on her borrowed heels, and walked up the stone steps to where another man stood waiting to open the door. Inside, the house was even more beautiful. High ceilings painted with murals of angels and clouds, a sweeping staircase that curved upward like a frozen wave. Everywhere she looked there was art, paintings and sculptures and tapestries that seemed to whisper of other centuries, other worlds. A woman appeared at the top of the staircase. She was perhaps 60 years old, tall and thin, with silver hair swept back from a face that had once been beautiful and was now merely striking. She wore black, head to toe, and her eyes were the same impossible darkness as Don Aurelio's. "You must be Elise," the woman said, and her voice was like honey poured over broken glass. "I am Lucia, Aurelio's wife. He asked me to greet you." She descended the staircase with the grace of someone who had been taught to move like this from childhood, and when she reached the bottom, she took Elise's hands in hers and studied her face with an intensity that made Elise want to look away. "So young," Lucia murmured, "so innocent." He always did have a weakness for the innocent ones. Before Elise could ask what she meant, Lucia released her hands and turned toward a pair of tall wooden doors at the far end of the entrance hall. "Come," she said, "dinner is about to be served. Aurelio does not like to be kept waiting." The dining room was a masterpiece of controlled opulence. A long table set for 12, though only 4 places had been laid. Crystal chandeliers that cast a warm golden light over everything. Candles burning in silver holders, their flames reflected in the polished surface of the table. And at the head of it all, Don Aurelio Montefiore, looking exactly as he had that night in the casino, small and soft and utterly terrifying. "Elise," he said, rising from his chair as she entered. "How wonderful! You look magnificent." He came around the table to greet her, taking her hands in his and pressing his lips to her cheek in a gesture that was almost fatherly. The scent of him was expensive, sandalwood and something darker beneath, and his touch was as cold as she remembered. "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair at his right. "Sit. Eat. We have much to discuss." Elise sat. Lucia took the seat across from her, and a moment later, Victor appeared through a side door and took the fourth chair. He did not look at Elise. He stared straight ahead, his face as expressionless as stone, and she wondered if he had been ordered to ignore her, or if it was simply his nature to pretend she did not exist. Servants appeared with the first course, a delicate soup of mushrooms and cream that Elise could not taste. She forced herself to eat, to smile, to respond to Don Aurelio's questions about her life and her work and her family. She told him about her father, who had died when she was 12, her mother who had remarried and moved to Florida, the sister she had not spoken to in 5 years. She told him about her dreams of leaving Atlantic City, of going somewhere warm and bright and new. He listened to all of it with what appeared to be genuine interest. He nodded in the right places, made sympathetic noises when her story turned sad, smiled when she tried to make light of her circumstances, and all the while his black eyes watched her, studied her, took her apart piece by piece and reassembled her into something he could understand. When the main course arrived, roast lamb with rosemary and garlic, he finally told her why she was there. "I have a proposal for you," he said, cutting into his meat with the precision of a surgeon. "A business arrangement, if you will, something that would benefit us both." Elise set down her fork. Her appetite, never strong to begin with, had vanished entirely. "I do not understand," she said. "I'm just a waitress. I do not have anything to offer someone like you." Don Aurelio smiled. It was the same warm, paternal smile he had given her that first night, and it was no less terrifying now than it had been then. "On the contrary," he said, "you have something I need very much. You have Victor." At the sound of his name, Victor's head turned slightly. His pale eyes flickered toward Don Aurelio, and Elise saw something pass across his face, something that might have been surprise or anger or fear. "Victor has been with me for 30 years, Don Aurelio continued. "He has been my most loyal servant, my most effective tool. But lately, I have noticed a change in him, a distance, a coldness that goes beyond even his usual nature. I feared I was losing him. And then you appeared." He leaned forward and his dark eyes seemed to grow even darker. "You kissed him," he said, "in front of everyone. And for the first time in 3 decades, I saw him react. I saw him feel something. You brought him back to life, Elise. And I need you to keep him alive." Elise shook her head. She did not understand. She did not want to understand. "I do not know what you are asking me to do," she said. "I'm asking you to stay," Don Aurelio replied, "to become part of my household, to be a companion to Victor, a friend, a presence in his life. In return, you will want for nothing. Money, clothes, a room in this house, anything you desire. All I ask is that you keep my fixer from disappearing into the shadows entirely." Elise looked at Victor. He was staring at the table now, his jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists on either side of his plate. He had not agreed to this. She could see that clearly. He had not even known this was coming. "What if I refuse?" she asked. Don Aurelio spread his hands in a gesture of resignation. "Then you are free to go," he said. "I will have someone drive you home and you will never hear from us again. But I think you will find that your life in Atlantic City has become very difficult. Bills that were manageable will suddenly become overwhelming. Landlords who were patient will suddenly become demanding. Opportunities that seemed promising will suddenly evaporate. I do not threaten, Elise. I simply observe the way the world works, and the world tends to work in my favor." The threat was clear, even wrapped in silk and served with fine wine. Elise understood it perfectly. She could refuse, and her life would become impossible. She could accept, and her life would become something else entirely. She looked at Victor again. He still would not meet her eyes. "Can I have time to think about it?" she asked. Don Aurelio nodded. "Of course," he said. Take the weekend. Consider your options. But know this, Elise. What I am offering you is not a cage, it is an opportunity. A chance to become something more than a girl serving lobster rolls to tourists. A chance to matter. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Elise ate without tasting, spoke without hearing, smiled without feeling. When it was over, Lucia led her to the door and pressed her hands one last time. "Be careful," Lucia whispered so quietly that Elise almost did not hear. "My husband collects people the way other men collect art. And once you are part of his collection, you never leave." The car took her home. She sat in the back seat and watched the dark trees slide past and thought about what Lucia had said. A collection. That was what she would become. A pretty thing to be displayed and admired and eventually forgotten. But even as she told herself to refuse, to walk away, to take whatever punishment Don Aurelio could devise, she knew she would not. Because there had been something in Victor's eyes when she kissed him, something broken and hungry and desperately alone. And some part of her, the same reckless part that had walked across that casino floor on a dare, wanted to know what it would take to make that look disappear. She made her decision before the car reached her building. She would go back. She would accept Don Aurelio's offer. She would become part of his household, his collection, his world, not because she was afraid, because she wanted to. And that, she realized as she climbed the stairs to her empty apartment, was the most frightening thing of all. 3 months passed in the mansion, and Elise learned the rhythms of a world she had never known existed. She learned that breakfast was served at 7, that Don Aurelio took his coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream, that Lucia spent her mornings in the garden tending roses that bloomed red as wounds. She learned which doors were always locked, which hallways led to rooms she was forbidden to enter, which servants could be trusted, and which reported everything they heard directly to the Don. And she learned about Victor. He was a ghost in his own home. He ate his meals in silence, spoke only when spoken to, disappeared for days at a time on business. He never explained. When he was present, he sat in the library with a book he never seemed to read, or stood at the window staring out at the grounds with an expression that was neither sad nor angry, but simply empty, as if someone had reached inside him and scooped out everything that made a person human. Elise tried to reach him. She sat beside him in the library and talked about nothing, about the weather and the books on the shelves, and the dreams she had given up when she came to this place. She brought him coffee in the mornings and wine in the evenings, and once, on a night when the moon was full and the house was quiet, she found him sitting alone on the back terrace and sat down beside him without a word. He did not acknowledge her at first. He stared out at the darkness, at the trees that ringed the property like silent sentinels, at the distant glow of Atlantic City on the horizon. His scarred face was silver in the moonlight, and his pale eyes were fixed on something she could not see. "Why are you here?" he asked finally, and his voice was rough, as if he had not used it in days. "Because you are," she said. "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." They sat in silence for a long time. Then Victor turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something she had not seen before. Not hunger, not emptiness. Something closer to curiosity, as if she were a puzzle he could not quite solve. "You should not be here," he said. "You should have run when you had the chance. This place, these people, they will destroy you. They destroy everyone eventually." "Then why do you stay?" Elise asked. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he lifted his left hand, the one with the missing fingers, and held it up to the moonlight. "Because I have nowhere else to go," he said. "Because the man I was died 31 years ago, and the thing that took his place belongs to Don Aurelio. I am not a person, Elise. I am a tool, a weapon, something to be used and discarded when I am no longer useful." "That is not true," Elise said, and she reached out and took his damaged hand in both of hers. "You are more than that. I saw it that night in the casino. I saw it when you looked at me." Victor pulled his hand away. He stood abruptly, knocking over his chair, and when he spoke his voice was harsh with something that might have been fear. "You do not know what you saw," he said. "You do not know what I have done, the things I have buried, the names I have erased. If you knew, if you understood, you would not sit here holding my hand and telling me I am more than a monster." He walked away into the darkness, leaving her alone on the terrace with the moon and the silence, and the feeling that she had touched something fragile and felt it shatter beneath her fingers. The next morning, Don Aurelio summoned her to his study. It was a room she had never entered before, though she had passed its heavy oak doors 100 times. Inside it was smaller than she expected, lined with books from floor to ceiling, and dominated by a massive desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of dark wood. Don Aurelio sat behind the desk, his hands folded before him, his black eyes watching her with an expression she could not read. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. "We need to talk about Victor." Elise sat. She folded her hands in her lap and waited, the way she had learned to wait in this house, with patience and silence and the constant awareness that every word she spoke was being weighed and measured. "He spoke to you last night," Don Aurelio said. "On the terrace, he told you things he has never told anyone." "I did not realize we were being watched," Elise said. Don Aurelio smiled. "Everything in this house is watched," he replied. "Every word, every gesture, every glance. It is how I keep my family safe. It is how I know who to trust." He leaned forward, and his dark eyes seemed to grow darker still. "Victor has not spoken to anyone about his past in 30 years, he said. Not to me, not to Lucia, not to the men who serve him. But last night, with you, he opened a door that has been locked since the night I found him. Do you understand what that means?" Elise shook her head. She did not understand. She did not understand anything about this world or the people in it. "It means you have power over him," Don Aurelio said. "Power that no one else has ever had. And power in this family is a dangerous thing." He stood and walked around the desk until he was standing before her, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the fine network of wrinkles around his eyes. "I brought you here to keep Victor alive," he said, "to give him something to hold on to, something to remind him that he is still human. And you are doing that. You are doing it better than I could have hoped. But there are others in this house who see what is happening between you, and they are afraid." "Others," Elise repeated. Don Aurelio nodded. "My son, Marco. He has been waiting for years to take Victor's place, to become my fixer, my most trusted weapon. He sees you as a threat. He sees Victor's attachment to you as a weakness that can be exploited. And Marco, unlike me, does not understand the value of patience." He reached out and touched her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "Be careful," he said. "Be watchful. And if anything happens, if you see anything or hear anything that troubles you, come to me. Do not try to handle it yourself. Do not trust anyone else, only me." He released her and returned to his seat behind the desk. "Now go," he said. "I have work to do. And Elise, remember what I told you. In this house, loyalty is rewarded, but betrayal is punished in ways you cannot imagine." Elise left the study with her heart pounding and her mind racing. She had known in some vague way that there were dangers here beyond the obvious ones, but she had not known about Marco. She had not known that there were factions within the family, that her presence had upset some delicate balance of power that she could not see or understand. She went looking for Victor. She found him in the library, standing at the window with his back to the room, his silver hair catching the morning light. "Victor," she said, "we need to talk." He did not turn around. "I have nothing to say to you," he replied. "Last night was a mistake. It will not happen again." "Don Aurelio told me about Marco," Elise said. "He told me that Marco sees me as a threat, that he sees your attachment to me as a weakness." At this, Victor turned. His pale eyes were cold, colder than she had ever seen them, and his voice when he spoke was like the edge of a blade. "I am not attached to you," he said. "You are nothing to me. You are a plaything the Don has given me to keep me docile, and when he tires of you, you will disappear just like all the others." The words hit her like a physical blow. She took a step backward, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. "I do not believe you," she said. "I do not believe that is what you really think." Victor moved toward her, and for a moment she thought he might strike her, but instead he stopped just inches away, so close she could see the individual scars on his face, the pale grey of his eyes like winter ice. "It does not matter what you believe," he said. "It only matters what is true, and the truth is that everyone who gets close to me ends up dead. My wife, my daughter, everyone. The Don knows this. He is using you to control me, and when he is finished, he will throw you away like garbage." He turned and walked toward the door. "Stay away from me," he said without looking back. "For your own sake. Stay away." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone in the library with the books and the silence, and the growing certainty that everything Don Aurelio had told her was a lie. That night, she met Marco for the first time. He came to her room unannounced, slipping through the door like a shadow and closing it behind him before she even knew he was there. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's elegant features. But where Don Aurelio's face was soft with age, Marco's was hard with ambition, and the smile he gave her was not warm at all. "So you are the girl who has bewitched our Victor," he said, leaning against the door with his arms crossed over his chest. "The waitress from Atlantic City who walked up to the most dangerous man in my father's empire and kissed him on the cheek." Elise stood frozen by her bed. She was wearing only a nightgown, thin and white, and she felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the fabric. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said. Marco laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Do not play innocent with me," he said. "I have been watching you since the day you arrived. I have seen the way Victor looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. I have seen the way you touch his hand and whisper in his ear and make him forget what he is." He pushed himself off the door and walked toward her, and with each step he took, Elise felt her heart beat faster. "My father thinks he is clever," Marco continued. "He thinks he can use you to keep Victor loyal. But my father is old, and he does not see what I see. Victor is not becoming loyal. He is becoming weak, and a weak fixer is useless to this family." He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath and see the cruel glint in his dark eyes. "I am going to give you a choice," he said. "You can leave this house tonight, disappear back to your pathetic little life and forget any of this ever happened. Or you can stay and see what happens when you get between me and what I want." Elise forced herself to meet his gaze. She thought of Victor's warnings, of Don Aurelio's advice, of Lucia's whispered words about collections and cages. She thought of the girl she had been 3 months ago, the waitress who had crossed a casino floor on a dare and kissed a stranger. "I am not going anywhere," she said. Marco's smile widened. He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers cold against her skin. "Then you have made your choice," he said, "and you will live with the consequences." He left as silently as he had come, and Elise stood trembling in the center of her room, knowing that she had just declared war on a man who had been raised to destroy anyone who stood in his way. The next few weeks were a lesson in fear. Marco did not threaten her openly again, but his presence was everywhere, a constant reminder that she was being watched. She would find her belongings moved, her clothes rearranged, her door unlocked when she was certain she had locked it. Small things, insignificant things, but they added up to a campaign of terror that never let her forget she was not safe. Victor noticed the change in her. He began to appear at odd moments, in doorways and hallways and corners, always watching, always silent. Once, she found him standing outside her door at 3 a.m, his pale eyes fixed on something in the darkness. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Keeping watch," he replied. "Go back to sleep." She did not go back to sleep. She lay awake until dawn, listening to the sound of his breathing through the door, feeling something warm and frightening bloom in her chest. The breaking point came on a night in late autumn, when the trees around the mansion had turned to fire and the air smelled of smoke and dying leaves. Elise was walking back to her room from dinner when she heard voices coming from Don Aurelio's study. She stopped, pressed herself against the wall and listened. It was Marco and his father arguing. She could not make out all the words, but she heard her name and Victor's, and something about a plan that would solve everything. Don Aurelio's voice was calm and measured, but Marco's was rising, growing more desperate with each exchange. Then she heard footsteps approaching the door, and she ran. She did not stop running until she reached Victor's room. She pounded on the door until he opened it, and then she pushed past him and stood in the center of his sparse chamber, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. "Marco is planning something," she said. "I heard him talking to his father. They mentioned my name and yours and some kind of plan." Victor closed the door. His face was as expressionless as ever, but there was something in his eyes, some flicker of the hunger she had seen that first night. "I know," he said. "I have known for weeks. Marco wants to take my place. He thinks if he can eliminate me, his father will have no choice but to make him the new fixer." "And what about me?" Elise asked. Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and stood before her, closer than he had ever stood, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body and smell the whiskey on his breath. "Marco sees you as my weakness," he said. "He thinks if he hurts you, I will make a mistake." And he is right. He lifted his damaged hand and touched her face, his remaining fingers tracing the line of her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man like him. "I have tried to push you away," he said. "I have tried to make you hate me. But you will not go, you will not leave, and now it is too late. Now you are part of me whether I wanted it or not." Elise reached up and covered his hand with her own. "I am not afraid," she said. Victor smiled, and it was not the cold smile she had seen before. It was something softer, something almost human. "You should be," he said, "because what comes next will be worse than anything you can imagine." He leaned down and kissed her, and in that moment, Elise understood that everything she had known, everything she had been, was gone forever. She had stepped into the darkness, and there was no going back. The kiss lasted only a moment. Then Victor pulled away and walked to the window, his back to her, his shoulders tense. "Go to your room," he said. "Lock the door. And tomorrow do exactly what I tell you. Marco is making his move, and we need to be ready." Elise left without another word. She walked back to her room on legs that felt like water, and locked the door behind her. She sat on her bed and touched her lips, still warm from his kiss, and she waited for the dawn. When it came, she was not the same woman she had been when she arrived at this house 3 months ago. She was something else now, something darker, something dangerous, and she was ready for whatever came next. The morning after the kiss, Victor came to Elise's room before dawn. He knocked once, a single soft rap against the wood, and when she opened the door, he was already turning away, gesturing for her to follow him through the sleeping house. They walked in silence through corridors she had never seen, down staircases that led to basements she had not known existed. The air grew colder as they descended, thick with the smell of stone and something else, something metallic and old. Finally, Victor stopped before a heavy iron door and produced a key from his pocket. Inside was a room that made Elise's blood run cold. It was a chamber of archives, rows upon rows of filing cabinets stretching back into the darkness, each one labeled with dates that spanned decades. The walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them, black and white images of men and women and children, their faces frozen in time, their eyes staring out at nothing. "What is this place?" Elise whispered. Victor walked to the nearest cabinet and pulled open a drawer. Inside were files, thick manila folders stuffed with papers and photographs and documents of every kind. "This is the Don's collection," he said. "Not the one his wife spoke of. The other one. The one that keeps this family in power." He pulled out a file and handed it to her. Elise opened it with trembling fingers and found herself looking at a photograph of a man in a judge's robes, smiling at the camera with the easy confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. Behind the photograph were documents, bank statements and letters and photographs of the judge with women who were not his wife. "Blackmail," Elise said. Victor nodded. "Every politician, every judge, every police captain in New Jersey, every businessman who ever tried to cheat the Montefiores, every rival who ever thought they could challenge the Don's authority. They are all here. Their secrets, their sins, their weaknesses." He closed the drawer and turned to face her. "This is how the family survives," he said. "Not through violence, though violence has its place. Through knowledge, through control, and I am the one who gathers it. I am the one who finds the secrets and buries the bodies and makes the problems disappear. This is what I am, Elise. This is what you have chosen to love." Elise looked at the files, at the photographs on the walls, at the man standing before her with his scarred face and his missing fingers, and his eyes that had seen more death than she could imagine. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. Because Marco has a file too, Victor replied, and tonight we are going to use it. He led her deeper into the archive to a section that was locked behind a second iron door. Inside, the files were thinner, more carefully guarded. Victor went directly to one cabinet, pulled out a single folder and handed it to her. Inside were photographs of Marco with a woman Elise did not recognize, a beautiful woman with dark hair and darker eyes, who looked at the camera with an expression of pure hatred. There were letters written in Italian, and bank statements showing transfers to accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. "Who is she?" Elise asked. "Her name was Valentina," Victor said. "She was the daughter of Enzo Caruso, the Don's oldest rival. Marco met her 5 years ago at a party in New York. They had an affair, a long one, and during that affair Marco told her things. Things about his father's business, his father's plans, his father's weaknesses. He took the file from her hands and closed it. When the Don found out, he ordered me to make Valentina disappear. But Marco did not know that I kept copies of everything. The letters, the photographs, the recordings of their conversations. I kept them because I knew someday Marco would become a threat, and now that day has come." Elise understood. She understood the game they were playing, the weapons they were wielding, the stakes that were higher than her life or Victor's. "You are going to expose him," she said. Victor shook his head. Exposure would destroy him, but it would also destroy the family. The Don would never allow it. "No, we are going to do something else. We are going to make Marco understand that he cannot win, that if he moves against us, everything he has hidden will come to light, and then we are going to give him a choice." "What choice?" Elise asked. Victor's pale eyes were cold as winter. "The same choice the Don gave me 31 years ago," he said. "Death or exile. Those are the only options in this family, and Marco will choose exile because for all his ambition, he is a coward at heart. He would rather live in disgrace than die with honor." They left the archive as the first light of dawn was creeping through the windows upstairs. Victor walked Elise back to her room and stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "Tonight," he said, "the Don is hosting a dinner for the family. All the captains will be there, all the underbosses, everyone who matters. That is when we will make our move." He turned to leave, but Elise caught his arm. "Victor," she said, "what happens after? If this works, if Marco is exiled, what happens to us?" Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he reached up and touched her face, his damaged hand gentle against her cheek. "I do not know," he said. "I have not thought beyond tonight. I have not allowed myself to hope for anything in 31 years. But if we survive this, if we are still standing when the dust settles, then maybe we can find out together." He kissed her forehead, a brief and tender gesture that made her heart ache, and then he was gone. The day passed in a haze of anticipation and fear. Elise went through the motions of her usual routine, eating meals she did not taste, speaking words she did not hear, waiting for the night to fall. She saw Marco once, crossing the entrance hall with a group of men she did not recognize, and he smiled at her with a knowing cruelty that made her skin crawl. He knew something was coming. She could see it in his eyes, but he did not know what, and that uncertainty was eating at him. Evening came, and with it, the guests. They arrived in a procession of black cars, men in expensive suits and women in designer dresses, their faces hard with the knowledge of what they were and what they had done to get here. Elise watched them from her window, counting the cars, noting the faces, trying to understand the hierarchy of power that was assembling in the mansion below. A knock at her door. She opened it to find one of the household servants, a young woman named Maria who had been kind to her since her arrival. "The Don requests your presence at dinner," Maria said. "He has sent you something to wear." She gestured to a box on the hallway table, white with a black ribbon, identical to the one that had appeared outside Elise's apartment in Atlantic City all those months ago. Inside was a dress, black this time, not red, with long sleeves and a high collar and a skirt that fell to the floor. It was elegant and severe, the dress of a woman who belonged to this world, and when Elise put it on, she felt something shift inside her, some final barrier falling away. She descended the staircase at 8 o'clock precisely. The entrance hall was full of people. Clusters of men and women speaking in low voices, their eyes tracking her as she moved through them toward the dining room. She felt their gazes like physical weight, assessing her, measuring her, trying to determine what she was and whether she was a threat. The dining room had been transformed. The long table was set for 40, with crystal and silver and candles burning in every corner. Don Aurelio sat at the head, with Lucia on his right and an empty chair on his left. Marco was seated halfway down, surrounded by men who leaned in to hear his every word, and Victor stood at the far end of the room, near the service entrance, watching everything with his pale grey eyes. "Elise," Don Aurelio called out, his voice carrying over the murmur of conversation. "Come, sit beside me." She walked the length of the room, feeling every eye upon her, and took the seat at the Don's left hand. It was a place of honor, a statement that could not be misunderstood. She saw Marco's jaw tighten, saw the flash of anger in his dark eyes, and she knew that Victor had been right. Tonight was the night. The meal began. Course after course was served, each more elaborate than the last, and Don Aurelio kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Elise about her life before the mansion, her dreams, her fears. She answered as best she could, but her attention was elsewhere, watching Marco, watching Victor, waiting for the moment when everything would change. It came between the fish course and the lamb. Don Aurelio stood, raising his glass, and the room fell silent. "My friends," he said, "my family. We gather tonight to celebrate the strength of our bonds and the loyalty that holds us together. But I must speak of something else, something that has troubled me for many months now." He paused, and his dark eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Marco before moving on. "There is a traitor among us," he said, "someone who has betrayed the trust I placed in them, someone who has conspired with our enemies and plotted against their own blood." The silence was absolute. Elise could hear her own heartbeat, loud in her ears. "Marco," Don Aurelio said, and his voice was soft now, almost gentle. "Stand up." Marco did not move. His face had gone pale, his eyes darting around the room, looking for allies, looking for escape. "Stand up," Don Aurelio repeated, and this time there was steel in his voice. Slowly Marco rose from his chair. He stood with his hands at his sides, his shoulders back, trying to project a confidence he clearly did not feel. "Father," he began. "Do not speak," Don Aurelio cut him off. "I know everything. I know about Valentina. I know about the information you gave her. I know about the money you have been hiding, the plans you have been making, the men you have been recruiting behind my back." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, the same folder Victor had shown Elise that morning. He tossed it onto the table in front of Marco, and the contents spilled out. Photographs and letters and bank statements scattering across the white linen. "You thought you could replace Victor," Don Aurelio said. "You thought you could take his place at my side, become my fixer, become the power behind the throne. But you forgot one thing, my son. Victor has been with me for 31 years. He knows every secret this family has ever kept, and he keeps them, not because I pay him, not because I threaten him, but because he is loyal. Because he understands that loyalty is the only thing that matters in this world." He turned to look at Victor, and something passed between them, some silent communication that Elise could not interpret. "Victor," he said, "come here." Victor walked the length of the room and stood beside Don Aurelio. His face was as expressionless as ever, but there was something in his posture, some tension that had not been there before. "Tell them," Don Aurelio said. "Tell them what you told me this morning." Victor turned to face the assembled guests. When he spoke, his voice was clear and cold. "Marco Montefiore has been working with the Caruso family for 5 years," he said. "He provided them with information about our operations, our weaknesses, our plans. He received payment in exchange, which he hid in offshore accounts. And he was preparing to move against his father, to stage a coup that would put him in control of the family." Marco laughed, a harsh and bitter sound. "And you believe him," he said, looking at his father. "You believe this butcher, this dog, over your own son?" "I believe the evidence," Don Aurelio replied. "I believe the photographs and the letters and the recordings that Victor has kept for 5 years, waiting for this moment. And I believe what I have always known about you, Marco. that you are weak, that you are greedy, that you would sell your own blood for power. He stepped closer to his son, and his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "You have a choice," he said. "The same choice I give to all traitors. You can die here tonight in front of everyone who ever respected you. Or you can leave. You can take nothing with you. No money, no name, no protection. You can walk out of this house and never return, never contact anyone in this family. Never speak of what you have seen or done. You will be dead to us. But you will be alive." Marco's face twisted with rage and humiliation. He looked around the room at the men who had been his allies, his supporters, his friends. None of them met his eyes. "This is not over," he said. "This is not finished." "Yes," Don Aurelio said, "it is." He gestured to Victor, who stepped forward and took Marco by the arm. For a moment it seemed like Marco would resist, would fight, would do something foolish and brave. But then the fight went out of him, and he allowed himself to be led away through the service entrance and into the darkness beyond. The room remained silent for a long moment after he was gone. Then Don Aurelio picked up his glass and raised it once more. "To loyalty," he said, "the only thing that matters." The guests echoed his toast, and the dinner resumed as if nothing had happened. But Elise saw the fear in their eyes, the calculation, the reassessment of power and position. Don Aurelio had just destroyed his own son in front of everyone who mattered, and he had done it without hesitation, without remorse, without a flicker of emotion crossing his soft grandfatherly face. This was the world she had chosen. This was the family she had joined, and there was no going back. Victor returned an hour later, as the last of the guests were leaving. He found Elise on the back terrace, standing where they had sat together all those weeks ago, staring out at the darkness. "It is done," he said. "Marco is gone. He will not return." Elise did not turn around. "Where did you take him?" she asked. "To the border," Victor replied. "He is someone else's problem now." He moved to stand beside her, and for a long time they stood in silence, watching the lights of Atlantic City glitter on the horizon. "I thought it would feel different," Elise said finally. "I thought I would feel relieved, or happy, or something." Victor reached out and took her hand in his. "That is not how it works," he said. "In this life, you do not feel relieved. You do not feel happy. You only feel the absence of immediate danger, and that is enough. It has to be enough." Elise turned to look at him. His scarred face was silver in the moonlight, and his pale eyes were fixed on hers with an intensity that made her heart ache. "Is that what I have to look forward to?" she asked. "An endless absence of danger. Is that what love looks like in this world?" Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture so tender and unexpected that it brought tears to her eyes. "I do not know what love looks like in this world," he said. "I have not loved anyone in 31 years, but if you will let me, I would like to find out." He pulled her close and held her, and Elise felt something break inside her, something that had been wound tight since the night she walked across that casino floor and kissed a stranger. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but for the first time since she had come to this house, they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief and something else, something that might, with time and patience and luck, become love. 1 year passed in the mansion, and Elise learned that peace in the Montefiore household was never more than an illusion. The days after Marco's exile were quiet, almost unnaturally so, and she found herself waiting for something terrible to happen, for the other shoe to drop, for the fragile happiness she had found with Victor to shatter like glass. But the months went by, and nothing happened. Victor continued his work for the Don, disappearing for days at a time and returning with shadows in his eyes that he would not explain. Elise continued her strange existence as something between a guest and a prisoner, learning the rhythms of the household, building careful alliances with the servants, watching Lucia tend her blood-red roses in the garden. She and Victor had found something together, something neither of them had expected. It was not the passionate romance of young lovers, not the desperate hunger she had read about in books. It was quieter than that, deeper. It was two people who had been broken by life learning to be whole again in each other's presence. It was late nights on the terrace, talking about everything and nothing. It was Victor's hand reaching for hers in the darkness. It was the way he looked at her sometimes, as if he could not quite believe she was real. They did not speak of the future. In this world, the future was a luxury no one could afford. They lived day by day, moment by moment, taking what happiness they could find and holding it close like a candle flame in a hurricane. But happiness, Elise was learning, always came with a price. It was a night in late autumn, almost exactly a year since she had first arrived at the mansion, when Lucia came to her room. The older woman knocked once and entered without waiting for a response, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her dark eyes bright with something that might have been fear. "You need to leave," Lucia said. "Tonight. Now." Elise sat up in bed, her heart already racing. "What has happened?" she asked. Lucia closed the door behind her and crossed the room to stand by the window, her thin frame silhouetted against the moonlight. "Marco," she said. "He has been in contact with the Caruso family. They have made an alliance, and tonight they are coming for my husband." Elise felt the blood drain from her face. "But the Don," she said. "Does he know?" Lucia turned to look at her, and in her eyes Elise saw something she had never seen before. Love. Not for her, not for Victor, but for the soft old man who had collected people like Art and destroyed his own son without hesitation. "Aurelio knows everything," Lucia said. "He has always known. He knew Marco would not stay away, knew the Carusos would see an opportunity. He has been preparing for this night for months." "Then why are you telling me to leave?" Elise asked. "Because what happens tonight will be terrible," Lucia replied. "Because men will die, and blood will be spilled, and nothing will ever be the same again. And because my husband asked me to give you a choice, the same choice he gave me 40 years ago, when I was a girl not much older than you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope, thick and cream-colored, and handed it to Elise. "Inside that envelope is everything you need," Lucia said. "Money, a passport, a plane ticket to Rome, a new name, a new life, a chance to start over somewhere far from here. You can take it and leave tonight before the killing starts, or you can stay and face whatever comes. The choice is yours." Elise looked at the envelope in her hands. She thought of the life she had left behind, the restaurant and the apartment and the friends who had dared her to kiss a stranger. She thought of the life she had found here, the darkness and the danger, and the man who had taught her what it meant to love someone who had forgotten how to be loved. She handed the envelope back to Lucia. "I am not leaving," she said. Lucia studied her face for a long moment. Then she nodded, and something like respect flickered in her dark eyes. "Then come with me," she said. "There is something you need to see." They walked through the sleeping house, down corridors Elise had never traveled, to a part of the mansion she had not known existed. Lucia led her to a heavy wooden door, pushed it open, and gestured for her to enter. Inside was a room that took her breath away. It was an armory, walls lined with weapons of every kind, rifles and shotguns and pistols arranged with military precision, boxes of ammunition stacked in neat rows, body armor hanging from hooks, and in the center of it all a long table covered with maps and photographs and documents. Don Aurelio stood at the head of the table, surrounded by men Elise recognized from the dinner a year ago. Victor was at his side, his scarred face grim, his pale eyes fixed on the maps before him. "Elise," Don Aurelio said, looking up as she entered, "you chose to stay." "I did," she replied. The Don studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good," he said. "We can use every loyal soul tonight. Victor, tell her what is happening." Victor stepped forward. His voice was calm, almost clinical as he explained the situation. "Marco has allied with the Caruso family," he said. "They have assembled a force of 30 men, soldiers and mercenaries, and they are planning to attack the mansion tonight. Their goal is to kill the Don, eliminate anyone loyal to him, and install Marco as the new head of the family." He pointed to the maps on the table, showing the approaches to the mansion, the weak points in the perimeter, the positions where defenders would be stationed. "We have 20 men," he continued, "fewer than they have, but we know this ground. We have had months to prepare, and we have something they do not have." "What is that?" Elise asked. Victor looked at her, and in his pale eyes she saw something she had not seen before. Not hunger, not emptiness, something fiercer, something that burned. "We have something worth fighting for," he said. The next hours were a blur of preparation. Elise was given a pistol, small and sleek, and Victor showed her how to use it, his hand steady on hers as he guided her through the motions. Load, aim, fire. Simple enough in theory, terrifying in practice. They stationed themselves throughout the mansion, small groups of men at every entrance, every window, every point where an attack might come. Don Aurelio remained in the armory with Lucia, surrounded by his most trusted guards. Victor took a position near the front entrance, and he insisted that Elise stay with him. "If this goes wrong," he said, "I want you where I can protect you." "And if it goes right?" Elise asked. Victor smiled, that rare and precious expression that transformed his scarred face into something almost beautiful. "Then we will have the rest of our lives to figure out what comes next," he said. They waited in darkness. The mansion was silent, every light extinguished, every breath held. Elise could hear her own heartbeat, loud in her ears, and the soft sound of Victor breathing beside her. The attack came at midnight. They came from all sides at once, dark figures moving through the grounds with the precision of trained soldiers. Elise heard the first shots from the east wing, then the west, then the sound of breaking glass somewhere above them, and then the front doors exploded inward, and the killing began. Victor moved like nothing she had ever seen. He was not a man in that moment, but something else, something primal and terrible, a force of nature wrapped in human flesh. He fired and reloaded and fired again, his movements fluid and precise, and men fell before him like wheat before a scythe. Elise stayed behind him, her pistol clutched in her hands, her finger on the trigger. She did not fire, she could not fire. She watched the violence unfold around her like a dream, like something happening to someone else. Then a man came at her from the side, a figure in black with a knife in his hand and murder in his eyes. She saw him coming, saw the blade glinting in the darkness, and something inside her shifted. She raised the pistol. She pulled the trigger. The man fell. Elise stood frozen, staring at the body at her feet, at the blood spreading across the marble floor. She had killed a man. She had taken a human life, and she felt nothing. Nothing but a cold, clear certainty that she would do it again if she had to. Victor appeared at her side. He looked at the body, then at her, and his pale eyes were filled with something that might have been pride or might have been sorrow. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded. She could not speak. "Stay close to me," Victor said. "It is almost over." He was right. The battle was winding down, the sounds of gunfire growing sporadic, then stopping altogether. When the last of the attackers had been killed or captured, Don Aurelio emerged from the armory, Lucia at his side, and surveyed the carnage with an expression of weary satisfaction. "Bring me Marco," he said. They found Marco hiding in the garden, crouched behind Lucia's roses with a pistol he had not had the courage to fire. Victor dragged him into the entrance hall and threw him at his father's feet, and Marco looked up at the man who had given him life with eyes full of hatred and fear. "You should have stayed away," Don Aurelio said. "You should have taken the gift I gave you and disappeared forever. But you could not let it go. You could not accept that you had lost." Marco spat at his father's feet. "You are old," he said. "You are weak. This family needs new blood, new leadership. It needs me." Don Aurelio shook his head, and for a moment he looked every one of his 73 years. "You still do not understand," he said. "This family does not need you. It never did. You were always a disappointment to me, Marco, a son who wanted power, but did not understand what power really means. Power is not about strength or violence or ambition. Power is about loyalty, about sacrifice, about knowing what you are willing to give up for the people you love." He turned to Victor, and something passed between them, some silent communication that had been forged over 31 years of blood and secrets. "Victor," he said, "do what must be done." Victor stepped forward. He drew a pistol from his holster and pressed it to Marco's forehead. "Wait," Marco said, and his voice was a broken thing, all the arrogance stripped away. "Father, please, I am your son, your blood, you cannot do this." Don Aurelio looked at his son. and in his black eyes there was no mercy, no hesitation, no love. "I can," he said, "and I will." Victor pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot echoed through the entrance hall, and Marco Montefiore fell dead at his father's feet. Elise watched it happen. She watched a father order the execution of his own son. She watched Victor, the man she loved, carry out that order without hesitation, and she understood, finally and completely, what it meant to be part of this family. There was no room for weakness here, no room for mercy or doubt or second chances. There was only loyalty and its price, blood and its consequences, love and the terrible things it demanded. Don Aurelio turned away from his son's body and walked toward the staircase. "Clean this up," he said to no one in particular, "and then come to my study. We have much to discuss." He climbed the stairs, Lucia at his side, and disappeared into the darkness above. Victor stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the body of the man he had just killed. Then he holstered his pistol and turned to Elise. "This is what I am," he said. "This is what I will always be. If you want to leave, I will not stop you. I will understand." Elise looked at him. She looked at the blood on his hands, the shadows in his eyes, the scars on his face that told the story of a lifetime of violence. And she walked toward him and took his damaged hand in hers. "I told you," she said. "I am not going anywhere." Victor closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet with tears he would not let fall. "Then come," he said. "The Don is waiting." They walked up the staircase together, leaving the bodies and the blood behind them. They walked into the study where Don Aurelio sat behind his massive desk, Lucia standing at his shoulder, and they stood before him like soldiers awaiting orders. "It is done," Don Aurelio said. "The Carusos are finished. Marco is dead. And this family will survive, as it has always survived." He looked at Victor, and for the first time since Elise had known him, his black eyes were soft with something that might have been affection. "You have served me faithfully for 31 years, he said. "You have done things that would have destroyed lesser men, and you have never asked for anything in return, until now." Victor said nothing. He stood perfectly still, his hand still clasped in Elise's. "I know what you want," Don Aurelio continued. "I have known since the night this girl walked into my casino and kissed you in front of everyone. You want to be free. You want to leave this life behind and find out what it means to be human again." He stood and walked around the desk until he was standing before them. This small, soft man who commanded an empire of shadows. "I am giving you that freedom," he said. "Both of you. You have earned it. The house in the country, the one you have never seen, it is yours now. Go there. Live there. Be happy, if such a thing is possible for people like us." He reached out and touched Victor's cheek, a gesture so tender and unexpected that Elise felt tears prick at her eyes. "You were the son I should have had," Don Aurelio said. "The loyal one, the strong one. And I am sorry for what I made you become. I hope in whatever years you have left, you can find some peace." Victor bowed his head. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Don Aurelio nodded. "Now go," he said, "before I change my mind." They left the mansion that night in a car that Victor drove himself, down dark roads that led away from Atlantic City and into the countryside beyond. Elise sat in the passenger seat and watched the lights fade behind them, watched the world she had known grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. They drove for hours, until the sun began to rise over the hills, until they came to a house at the end of a long dirt road, a small stone cottage surrounded by fields and forests and silence. Victor stopped the car and sat for a moment, staring at the house as if he could not quite believe it was real. "I have never been here," he said. "The Don told me about it years ago. He said it would be mine when I was ready. I never thought I would be ready." Elise reached over and took his hand. "Are you ready now?" she asked. Victor turned to look at her. His scarred face was golden in the morning light, and his pale eyes were clear for the first time since she had known him. "I do not know," he said, "but I am willing to find out." They got out of the car and walked to the front door. Victor produced a key from his pocket. old and tarnished, and fitted it into the lock. The door swung open, and they stepped inside. The cottage was small but beautiful, filled with morning light and the smell of dust and old books. There was a fireplace and a kitchen and a bedroom with a view of the hills. There was a garden overgrown with wildflowers, and a stream that ran along the edge of the property. There was peace and quiet, and the promise of something new. Elise stood in the center of the living room and looked around at this place that would become her home. She thought of the girl she had been a year ago, the waitress who had crossed a casino floor on a dare and kissed a stranger. That girl was gone now. She had died somewhere in the darkness of the Montefiore mansion, among the secrets and the blood and the terrible choices. But something new had been born in her place, something stronger, something that had looked into the heart of darkness and refused to look away. Victor came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Elise turned in his arms and looked up at him, this broken man who had taught her what it meant to love someone beyond reason, beyond safety, beyond hope. "I am thinking that I should thank my friends," she said, "for daring me to kiss the scariest man in the casino." Victor laughed, a sound she had never heard from him before, full and rich and alive. "I think I am the one who should thank them," he said. He kissed her then, a real kiss, not the desperate, hungry thing they had shared in the mansion, but something softer, something that spoke of years to come, of mornings and evenings, and all the quiet moments in between. When they finally broke apart, the sun was high in the sky, and the cottage was filled with golden light. "What do we do now?" Elise asked. Victor smiled. It was not the cold smile of the fixer, not the empty mask he had worn for 31 years. It was something new, something human, something that belonged only to her. "Now," he said, "we live." And they did. They lived in the cottage for many years, Victor and Elise, far from the world of the Montefiores and the violence they had left behind. They grew old together, their hair turning grey, their bodies slowing, their love deepening with each passing season. They never spoke of the things they had done, the blood they had spilled, the choices they had made. Those memories belonged to a different life, lived by different people. Don Aurelio died 3 years after they left, peacefully in his sleep, with Lucia holding his hand. The family continued without him, as it always had, passing from one generation to the next, the empire of shadows enduring even as the shadows themselves changed shape. But Victor and Elise were free of it, free of the blood and the secrets and the endless cycle of loyalty and betrayal. They had found something rare and precious, something that most people never find at all. They had found each other. And in the end, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.